The sea was boiling. Waves pounded against the coral reefs like ancient drums, and lightning streaked the sky in jagged white scars. Off the coast of Islamorada, where the water changes from turquoise to black under the storm shadow, a ghost ship was spotted sailing straight into the hurricane. No lights, no crew, no sails. The local fishermen swear by it. They call it the Sad, the Crybaby. But here's what chills the blood. This isn't the first time she's been seen. And every time she appears, someone disappears. A diver, a sailor, a tourist who ignored the warnings. According to an 1883 journal discovered in a shipwreck off Key West, now housed in a glass case at the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum, the Sad was a Spanish galleon captained by Hernán Salgado, an exorcist turned pirate who disappeared with his entire crew during the hurricane of June 1766. But the diary does not end with his disappearance, and it continued, in perfect ink, written over 100 years later. And here's the most interesting part. The handwriting matched Salgado's own. The Florida coast is a graveyard without headstones. More than 1,000 known shipwrecks line the state's waterfront, from gold-laden Spanish treasure fleets to drug boats sunk in the 1980s. Each wreck tells a story, but some don't want their stories told. Pick up the wreckage of the St. Michael the Archangel, discovered in 1974 by diver Carter J. Belton. The ship was perfectly preserved, cannons still loaded, the captain's cabin locked from the inside. When Belton broke into it, he found a diary sealed in wax. The last entry read, "The sea is not water, it is memory, and it remembers everything we have done." Belton disappeared a year later while solo diving near the wreck. His body was never recovered. Only his oxygen tank floated back to shore, still sealed. Residents of the Florida Keys began whispering about a curse. Divers began refusing work. A legend spread among the region's Cuban-American fishermen, passed down through ancient Havana tradition. Beware the singing sea. When it hums like a lullaby, the dead are calling. They called it the drowned song. The drowned song. And then at 3:33 a.m., the Coast Guard began picking up strange audio frequencies, soft, melodic, and undetectable, as if sung from the bottom of the ocean. Florida's identity has always been shaped by its coastline. Sunken fleets didn't just bring back treasure, they brought back stories, spirits, and trauma. When hurricane season begins, elders in some Afro-Caribbean communities in Miami still leave rum and bread at the water's edge, not for the living, but for the drowning. They say that if you don't feed them, they will come inland, not as waves, but as shadows in your dreams. Dr. Elena Cruz, a Tampa folklorist specializing in Caribbean diaspora legends, explains, "There is a belief that some spirits, especially those lost at sea, never find peace. They wander, riding the tides, until they find a voice, a body, to anchor themselves to. This is why many rituals involve songs, to keep the dead asleep." One of the most frightening cases she investigated occurred in 1998, when a 12-year-old boy in Fort Lauderdale began speaking fluent Spanish in his sleep, a language he had never been taught. He repeated the same phrase over and over, "I am Captain Salgado. The sea loves me again. I am Captain Salgado. The sea wants me again." His family moved to the countryside. His dreams were over. But 2 years later, during a family trip back to the coast, the boy disappeared while walking along the beach at night. All they found were footprints drifting toward the waves, with none that returned. Today, Florida's legends have infiltrated its economy. Haunted wreck dives are offered throughout the state. The Mariana Cross Ghost Dive near Key Largo attracts hundreds of adventure-seeking tourists every year, even after a freak electrical storm in 2016 destroyed every diver's camera after less than 5 minutes underwater. The footage was never recovered, but one diver, a professional named Maxine Soto, described something unforgettable. "We reached the wreck, and the ocean was still. No fish, no bubbles, as if it were holding its breath. Then I saw a face in the glass of my own diving mask, but it wasn't mine." Some say the waters around the Mariana Cross are abnormally warm, like bath water, and that electronic devices refuse to function properly. Marine biologists blame magnetic anomalies. Locals say it's because the wreck is located directly over one of the 7 drowned gates, a spiritual theory rooted in syncretic Haitian and Yoruba beliefs. One of these gates, they believe, leads directly to where the sea remembers. These stories aren't just myths. They resonate in modern media. Netflix's horror series Black Coral is loosely based on Florida shipwreck legends, specifically the cursed galleons and silent melodies. The series creators visited Key West and spent 2 weeks with local historians before writing the first season. Even during production, strange things happened, from corrupted audio files to a crew member who claimed to have been visited by an eyeless sailor while she slept. In 2021, a viral TikTok trend called 333 Dive saw users simulating images of ghost ships and underwater whispers. But one video stood out, posted by user Reefwalker74, showing what appeared to be an ancient compass spinning violently underwater, even as the diver remained perfectly still. It now has over 8.9 million views. And that's only half the story. Because while Florida's shipwreck legends come from the sea, where things drown, rot, and sing, Appalachian folklore, that comes from, or just, of caves and caverns where time distorts and shadows walk erect, of forests that swallow sounds and stories that whistle back. But before we head to those haunted mountains, what do you think so far? Have you ever felt the sea staring back at you? Tell me in the comments, and if you know any legends from your coast, I want to hear them. Sign up now so you don't miss the next part of this deep and dark journey. This isn't just entertainment. It's a descent into the legends that shaped America. In the shadowed spine of the Appalachian Mountains, where the sun disappears behind tree-covered ridges in the late afternoon, there are places untouched by modernity, hollow valleys where time stands still and the air tastes of damp moss and scrap metal. Here, among the rotting church pews and forgotten tombstones swallowed by ivy, a different kind of history takes root, not of tides and salt, but of blood and stone. In a small town called Elkmire, nestled deep in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, people don't talk much about the Hollow Men, unless there's a power outage, unless it's October and the fog descends from Spruce Knob like a pale serpent. They say the Hollow Men were never born, only carved from bark and earth, cursed to walk among the trees like sentinels of silence. No eyes, no mouths, just long sunken faces and the smell of pine tar and decay. The first written mention of them appears in a letter dated 1831 from a surveyor named George Whitlock to the Virginia Land Company. His words trembled through the ink. These forests are not empty. I have seen men, but not men, leaning against trees as if they were part of them. They do not move when observed, but disappear when they are gone. I am not well. I fear my mind is running away. His body was found weeks later, impaled on a pine branch 15 feet above the ground, with no footprints in the snow. The case was closed as a mountain accident. This explanation satisfied no one. The Appalachians have long been regarded as America's twilight region, neither entirely mythological nor entirely modern. A place of coal mines and blood feuds, moonlight and melody. But beneath the surface lies something older. The Cherokees who once walked these hills spoke of the Nunahai, the undying ones, spirits who lived in secret mountain caves and intervened only when the balance was upset. But there was another word, rarely shared, Utlunta, the spearfinger, a shapeshifter who walked in the form of an old woman feeding on the livers of children. She lived in the high places, where the granite cracked and the wind howled through narrow passages. She was no metaphor, she was memory. European settlers in the region absorbed and distorted these stories, bringing with them their own folklore, tales of black shuck, banshees, and woodwolves. Over time, these merged into new entities. One, unique to the Blue Ridge region, was simply called the knocker. It was heard, not seen, a rhythmic pounding coming from within stone walls, often beneath coal mines. Some miners left offerings of tobacco at the entrances before each shift. Others recited Psalm 91. Those who didn't often disappeared. In 1902, after the Richwood collapse, only one man survived, Elias Boone, mute from birth. When rescuers pulled him from the rubble, he whispered a name over and over, a name no one recognized, Kithra. He died 2 days later, his fingers raw from scratching the mine walls, covered in markings later identified as pre-Columbian, symbols found nowhere else in North America. In the 1930s, when the WPA sent artists and folklorists to rural America to preserve oral histories, they arrived in Appalachian valleys with microphones and notebooks. In Elkmire, they recorded an elderly woman named Agnes Krim reciting a lullaby that had not been recorded in any archive. If you go to the forest tonight, do not use the color white, for if they see your cotton shine, you'll never get home down there. She claimed the song had been passed down from her grandmother's grandmother, who arrived in the mountains from Germany in 1791. But linguistic analysis revealed phrases closer to Gaelic and a term, gleamfolk, of unknown origin. Agnes refused to say the word twice. When asked why, she stared at the interviewer and muttered, "The second time is how they hear you." The recording was archived, mislabeled as a nursery rhyme. It resurfaced in 2019 after a podcaster researching lost American songs stumbled upon it and posted it online. Within days, users began sharing stories. A hiker lost near Canaan Valley reported hearing whispering voices in the fog, calling her name. A caver in Tennessee caves claimed to have found a doll made of human teeth and cypress twine stuffed into a rock crevice 200 feet underground. The Appalachian subreddit overflowed with messages from people who grew up in mountain towns, recalling childhood warnings. Don't whistle at night. Don't look through trees after dark. Don't follow a voice that sounds like your mother's if she's not in the room. These weren't superstitions. They were survival tactics. The cultural fabric of Appalachia is woven with secrecy and reverence. Families keep stories to themselves, told around campfires, behind screen doors. The dead are honored in silence. There are rituals for births and others for disappearances. Some communities still nail iron horseshoes above doorframes. Others plant black walnut trees upside down near graves to imprison wandering souls. Few call these things spells, but they are. They are protections built from memory, from generations of not forgetting. In 1957, a team of anthropologists from New York University documented a curious phenomenon in a stretch of the Smoky Mountains, where several residents claimed to hear crying coming from the hills on moonless nights. It wasn't animal howls. It wasn't human cries. Something in between. The sound always came at the same time, 4:17 a.m., always from the same direction, east. One of the researchers, Dr. Milo Hearn, wrote in his journal, "The sound is indecipherable, but deeply emotional. It evokes loss before logic. My dreams have changed. I see pine trees with eyes." He disappeared in 1958. His tent was found with the zipper closed from the inside. Modern pop culture has flirted with Appalachian horror. Series like The Ritual Path and Pine Hollow draw heavily from these stories, though few acknowledge their origins. In fact, a 2022 independent film titled Where the Fog Stands Still was filmed entirely in a disused mining town near Norton, Virginia. The cast and crew reported power outages, missing props, and, in one case, a mirror that cracked from the inside. Director Jules Marin refused to return to the location for reshoots. More recently, a viral social media series titled Whistler Watch features nighttime footage of hikers attempting to record the unexplained high-pitched tones reported in the mountains. One clip from a user near Linville Gorge shows her GPS malfunctioning, her flashlight blinking, and in the background, a child's laughter followed by a mechanical clicking sound. Comments exploded. Some claimed it was fake. Others said the clicking sound was the same rhythm heard in the 1902 mine collapse reports. A historian of Appalachian mining folklore posted a video response confirming that the pattern matched the old reports of door knockers. But then came the most disturbing video. A man in Kentucky's Red River Gorge hiked alone and never returned. His cell phone was found weeks later by another group, its battery dead. When recovered, the final video showed him standing silently on the edge of a ridge, staring into the forest. A faint silhouette moved behind him. Tall, thin, featureless. The file was corrupted. But one frame, when played in slow motion, shows what appears to be tree bark fused to a human hand. This is where history mingles with mystery. The forest doesn't reveal its stories easily, and yet its influence spreads. Urban designers in Asheville have reported a trend of homeowners requesting entry doors made of Appalachian pine, shaped into the ancient guard arch shape. Musicians in Nashville reference melodies that supposedly come from cave echoes, transmitted by ancient scavengers who never left the mountains. Podcasts dedicated to cryptic realism draw inspiration from these stories with increasing frequency, blending research with legend until the seam is no longer visible. The backbone of Appalachia remains the last living archive of American folklore that never had to die. It wasn't swept away by progress. It hid, and in that hiding place, it grew teeth. We leave this session with an unanswered question. If the Appalachian forests have voices, what are they waiting to say? And to whom? Moving forward, we delve into the collision of these two forgotten worlds. When drowned souls from the coast encounter spirits trapped in the roots of the mountains, what survives? Somewhere between salt and soil, between coral reefs and pine canopies, lies a territory unmarked on any map. Not a place, but a state of convergence, where the drowned dead hide in the roots of ancient trees and mountain spirits savor the salt of foreign storms. In this space, the maritime hauntings of Florida mingle with the terrestrial ghosts of the Appalachian highlands, and when they meet, reality distorts. The first known encounter with these legends came not through ghost stories, but through blood. In 1875, a group of displaced Cuban fishermen moved north along the coast after a series of devastating hurricanes leveled their village near Tavernier Key. Seeking refuge, they settled along the Georgia lowlands before eventually spreading into the southern folds of the Appalachian Mountains, bringing with them stories of the ocean and, unknowingly, the ocean's dead. It was in a town called Copper Ridge, on the Georgia-Tennessee border, that something changed. 6 months after the fishermen arrived, livestock began to disappear. Cattle were found with swollen bellies and their eyes removed. Previously clear streams began to turn red during full moons. The town's Reverend Marcus Green publicly blamed the newcomers' foreign cult, referring to their Santeria-based water rituals. But privately, in his journal, he described something he had never said aloud. A dream in which he drowned in his own church, with the pews full of seaweed and a choir of whispering voices singing in Spanish. Her last entry, dated October 3rd, 1876, simply read, "She walks now." The Reverend was found face down in the baptismal font, his lungs full of brine. The townspeople said the sea had followed the fishermen into the mountain, that the spirits that once clung to coral rocks and shipwrecks now clung to pine roots and slate. The old women spoke of a figure with waterlogged hair and black glass eyes, seen near the edge of the forest, where salt shouldn't live. They called her La Mujer Subida, the climbing woman. This concept of a spirit from one geography adapting to another has intrigued scholars for decades. Theorists at Appalachian State and the University of Florida have coined the term cultural spectral migration, the idea that certain belief systems not only move with people, but evolve into entirely new mythological hybrids based on their environment. A 1983 journal article titled "Salt Echoes in the Ground" documented one of the strangest phenomena linked to this theory. In southern Appalachia, a series of abandoned moonshine stills were found buried with symbols traditionally associated with Caribbean water spirits. Copper coins, white stones, and coral fragments not native to any river system. At each site, carved into bark or nearby stone, was the same symbol, an eye with dripping eyelashes. Residents of Rabun County, Georgia, say it's a sign you're being watched by the Wet One, a spirit who rides the mist and searches for intruders. She's said to whisper songs to children and cry silently when the air pressure drops. In 2006, a child in Dillard disappeared after telling his grandmother he had a new friend in the creek. Search teams found small footprints leading to the river, and then nothing. Divers searched the area but found no trace. Days later, the boy's favorite toy boat floated downstream, scorched around the edges, with the letters of his name carved backward into the hull. These events triggered a new wave of paranoia. Believers demanded an end to river baptisms. Hikers reported trails that curved in on themselves, no matter how straight they were. The air took on a taste, salty with a fermented fruit sweetness, an otherworldly flavor no one could identify. Further north, in the heart of Kentucky's Redbird Valley, a series of folk songs began to spread during the folk revival of the 1960s. At first, they were dismissed as hillbilly inventions, but upon closer inspection, certain lyrics contained phrases in fragmented Spanish, words linked to seafaring laments, particularly those used in traditional Cuban canciones de luto. One such song, recorded by folklorist Linda Harriman in 1967, contained this haunting refrain: "I climbed too far, and now I'm drowning. The tree is tall, the tide is brown. I sing to keep the mountain quiet, but water drinks what the roots cannot kill." The melody followed a minor progression identical to the funeral songs of Havana's early colonial churches. Musicians unfamiliar with either tradition reported discomfort while performing the piece, some claiming the notes sunk their breath or left an iron taste in their mouths. In the 1980s, reports of sightings began to emerge. Visitors hiking remote trails reported hearing sounds like creaking wooden hooves or chains dragging across the forest floor. A forest ranger in North Carolina claimed to have witnessed a boat moving silently across a meadow at dawn, suspended inches above the grass, its hull dripping, but with no sign of recent rain or dew. As he approached, he disappeared, not with a sound, but with a sudden absence, as if the world had momentarily sobbed. Paranormal researchers have proposed that castaway spirits, separated from their natural habitat, began attaching themselves to other elements of the American landscape, particularly those with strong local mythologies of their own. In this case, the ancient forest deities of the Appalachians. What happens when two haunting systems collide? When the logic of maritime horror, drowning, sirens, currents, is forced to integrate with the logic of forest horror, roots, echoes, absence. A theory has emerged, at once terrifying and strangely beautiful. When spirits migrate, they merge. In a remote Appalachian museum in Clay County, a taxidermied creature rests behind a glass display case, unlabeled, unnamed. It resembles no known animal, a scaly deer, a humanoid face with barnacle scars along its cheekbones, eyes glazed like wet stones. It arrived anonymously in 1993. A handwritten note accompanied it. From where the sea stopped moving, DNA tests were inconclusive. The creature became a local joke, but the museum's night caretaker, in a 2014 interview, shared a recurring nightmare. In it, the deer beast stands over his bed, water streaming from its eyes, uttering words he can't understand. When he wakes, his sheets are soaked and his windows are fogged up from the outside. Cultural osmosis isn't always smooth. Just as European colonizers distorted native histories into cautionary tales, and just as Afro-Caribbean traditions adapted to southern soil, so too do spirits. They don't disappear, they adapt. This convergence isn't limited to rural areas. Urban legends in cities like Chattanooga and Asheville now include reports of salt shadows, tall, elongated figures that appear in alleys after torrential rains, dripping wet but dry to the touch. Psychologists explain them as projections of environmental anxiety. Locals are less clinical. A street performer in Asheville keeps a vial of seawater around her neck, claiming it keeps her from taking her breath away. In 2017, a horror-themed escape room in Tallahassee opened a new attraction called The Forest Below the Sea. Players had to navigate a sinking forest cabin, pursued by an entity with barnacle skin and pine needle hair. The experience went viral after several visitors experienced fainting and nausea. Medical experts blamed the humidity and immersive lighting. But one woman, in a later interview, claimed to have heard a child singing in her headphones, even though there were no children on the team. The popularity of these attractions reveals a deeper truth. People aren't just afraid. They're drawn to places where stories overlap, where boundaries are broken. There's something deliciously wrong about seeing an anchor buried in the mountainside or a lighthouse erected in a clearing of oak trees. It speaks to a primal recognition that the world doesn't stay in its ways, and neither do the dead. Modern storytellers have embraced this. Horror podcasts blend tales of nautical ghosts with forest cryptids. Movies depict forests inexplicably flooding, trees developing coral-like growths. A best-selling novel, The Hollow Tide, tells the story of a town where the sea invades the forest, and the screams of drowned sailors echo through the caves. Its author, a Gainesville native who grew up visiting family in Tennessee, described the story not as fiction, but as emotional documentation. He says, "I wanted to write the feeling I had as a child when my cousin told me that the creek behind the house was once an ocean, and sometimes the ocean forgot it was gone. This idea, that trauma endures, that water penetrates even stone, forms the emotional backbone of these interregional myths. In both cultures, whether coastal or mountainous, there is a belief that forgetting invites return. That memory is protection. That silence is risk." In 2023, an interdisciplinary study titled Geography of Memory used neural mapping to observe how people react to mixed-source terror stimuli. sea sounds and forest images, tree snaps and underwater scenes. The results were conclusive. The hybrid scenes triggered deeper fear responses than either traditional scenario alone. The study concluded with a chilling hypothesis. The unfamiliar within the familiar elicits the earliest alarm. We have entered an era in which regional folklore is no longer limited. Migration, media, and collective narrative have torn down the walls between land and sea, mountain and port. And in this collapse, legends have transformed. The drowned now walk beneath the treetops. The rooted now seek the tide. We must ask ourselves, if we continue to conjure up these stories for entertainment, for excitement, for profit, what happens when they stop working? When they want something in return? Ahead, the next gap. Now we return to Florida, not to its coast, but to its interior, to its rivers and freshwater springs. Because not everything that haunts Florida came from the ocean. Some things arose from the swamps, where the fog moves without wind and voices bubble up from below. The heart of Florida isn't the ocean. It's the murky, labyrinthine swamps that stretch inland, marshes and freshwater springs where the water is dark and still, where the line between land and liquid dissolves. In the small town of Choctawhatchee, legends tell of more than drowned sailors. They tell of swamp witches with voices like ice and eyes that glow through cypress roots. They tell of half-human, half-swamp creatures emerging at twilight, when mosquitoes rise like a breath. In 1899, a schoolteacher named Abigail Turner ventured into the Okefenokee Basin to study orchids and mosses. She carried a field notebook filled with pressed plants and sketches. But her last entry wasn't botanical. It read, "Now I can hear them. Voices in the mud, soft, calling my name." She disappeared before dawn. Her empty journal was found pinned to a bald cypress tree with a reed, each page soaked with water and something darker, almost like pitch. The ink had run, but her last words remained legible. No trace of her has ever been found. Locals say her spirit haunts the cypress tree, still calling botanists to the swamp. This was the beginning of a pattern. More than 30 disappearances between 1900 and 1950, all hikers, hunters, naturalists. In each case, the victims were last seen near water, woodland ponds, sinkholes, streams. Some were found years later, half buried in the mud, their faces frozen in expressions of disbelief. Others were never found. The stories spread, and the image of the swamp witch, known as La Bruja del Pantano, took shape. A woman at once seductive and terrifying, with oil-like hair and skin that exuded a seaweed-like sheen. In the 1950s, the legend merged with other local folklore. In some versions, she was a Seminole healer who became corrupted after the displacement of her people. In others, she was the daughter of a Spanish explorer who drowned in a spring and was resurrected. But the one constant was her voice, soft, with an Irish tinge, inviting the lost to sink deeper into the mire. She sang lullabies in an indecipherable mix of languages, Seminole, Spanish, Gaelic, weaving each note with sadness and seduction. These stories remained buried until the 1980s, when airboats and swamp tours became part of Florida's tourist economy. Visitors were told of ghosts and curses, but few took them seriously, until the sightings became too frequent to ignore. In 1984, an airboat operator named Luis Vega reported evacuating his boat after hearing a voice calling out "Luisito" just before the engine stalled. Another guide, filming a documentary, filmed a figure near the shore, a woman dressed in white, pale as moonlight, motionless. When they approached, she was gone, leaving behind only ripples in the dark water and the smell of decaying moss.
fraquezas.